Hi, this is Kevin Klinkenberg with the Messy City Podcast. Happy today to have my friend, another Kevin. You know, got to watch out. There's a lot of Kevins in the world. We may have to talk later about this thing I just read about called Kevinism that is in Germany. But my friend Kevin Shepard from Verdunity, did I say that right?
You did.
And you're joining us
see you again,
from
man.
Texas today.
Yeah, I am. I'm in Dallas.
Terrific. Well, there's a couple things that I really want to get into as we get through the podcast today. I know you all. Kevin's an engineer, and he's done a lot of interesting work in Texas and other states that we would probably consider like politically red. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff to talk about there, and also the notion of being a person that has a podcast and a blog, but also runs a consulting firm. There's some interesting stuff to talk about there. But before we do that, Kevin, I'd like to make sure people know who you are, and curious what your background is. I know from talking to you that you had a interesting professional background and all. Why don't you talk about where you're from and how you got started in the engineering and consulting business?
Yeah, so it's good to be on with you, Kevin. It's always as someone who hosts a podcast, it's always fun to be on somebody else's. So appreciate the invite. But I started out my degree as a civil engineer, where you're taught that growth and expansion is good, and the suburban experiment that we've been doing over the last 50, 60 years is the model that a lot of civil engineers and traffic engineers, transportation engineers are taught. What we're not taught in school is how we're going to pay for stuff on the back end. And so I did basic civil engineering for about 15, 16 years. Around the last recession, 2008, 2009, I got offered the opportunity to serve as national director of my former firm's community planning practice. And so I went from a world of engineering into planning and sustainability and placemaking. And that's really where my eyes got opened up of just the social, fiscal, environmental impacts of the world that we build. And so that led to us starting Verdunity April 2011. So it's been 12 years, which is crazy.
Yeah. Interesting time to start something too.
Yeah, I know. Right. But it was just, I was learning so many things working nationally, and I would come back to Dallas and think, what are we doing differently in Texas that's going to keep us from ending up like a Memphis or a Shreveport, Detroit, and realize not much. We're actually doing things bigger and better and faster, or so we think. And so that was the idea behind starting our firm. Is we wanted to help communities in Texas think differently about how we're developing, so that we can ultimately be more sustainable. And so we started out doing mostly engineering. We're more of a planning, probably do more 75% planning, 25% site development engineering now. But definitely feel like we've evolved as a company, and I've still continued to evolve professionally too, about how I think about planning and urban design and zoning and civil engineering as well. So it's been a fun journey.
So, and I know that you took a lot of inspiration from the Strong Towns movement and, our friend Chuck Marohn. So talk about maybe how that impacted your thinking. And was that sort of like a key factor in getting you to think about going out on your own?
Yeah. 2009, 2010, when I was starting to kind of have this realization that no matter what city I went to, it's a big city, small city, rural, urban, suburban, very few of them had the money that they needed to pay for infrastructure. That was kind of the aha thing for me. And so I started Googling around. I remember I was in my study one night and I came across Chuck's blog way back before Strong Towns was anything like what it is today. And I started reading it and was like, man, this is what I'm thinking. So I actually reached out to Chuck, asked him if he'd jump on the call with me, and and we ended up talking for a good hour and a half, 2 hours. And so, yeah, that definitely impacted our thinking. Was part of our early years as a firm. We partnered and did a lot with Chuck and Strongtown, still continue to. But yeah, Chuck's inspired me personally, but that work and seeing the evolution of Strong Towns and in terms of just advocacy and education, we're starting to hear more cities use that language and look for consultants like ours that want to help them put those things into practice. So yeah, Chuck especially, but Strong Towns too, have been a huge influence.
So then when you all decided to go out and do your own thing and look at forming a consulting practice, kind of breaking away from more of the corporate side, how did you decide like what services to offer? And I'm kind of curious, one of the things that I found when I had my old firm was the services that we intended to offer to start with ended up changing pretty dramatically, and we ended up doing a whole bunch of other different things. What's that been like for you guys?
Oh, totally, man. Like our North Star has always been to help communities become more sustainable. We want to help communities be more socially inclusive and equitable, more affordable, more resilient. But when you really get into kind of under the hood of how do you do that, I mentioned early on we did start as an engineering firm, and we were trying to help more places do what we thought were the right projects the right way, right? But in Texas, it was like just a brick wall of, that might have worked in Seattle, but we don't want that here, or that might have worked in Kansas City, and it was very much we're doing our thing in Texas. We don't need anything else, and so just kind of year to year thinking about the balance of we had to get work to pay the bills, and man, there's some projects we did in the early years that just like, and definitely if I go back to my old firm and some of the work that I did, it's even scarier to think about. But we kind of went through a period where we just started thinking about how can we get more communities to want to do projects differently, and so that led us into more education and ultimately more of like the comp plan work. We do a lot of comprehensive planning work and strategic planning work now, but we do it through a very different, through the fiscal sustainability lens. So I felt like the best way that we could still educate people, both inside a city and across a community, about these ideas, whether it's strong towns or incrementalism, doing it as part of a comp plan is a great way to get a lot of people inside City Hall and elected officials and across the community all to the table. And it's been really cool the last couple of years to see how doing the math and talking about the value of incremental development and pulling in some of things like the value per acre analysis that we'll do, and a lot of partnership with Monty Anderson to show how you can still build great places with local developers. It's been fun to just see communities think differently about how they're going to grow and develop. So that's just over our 12 years, we've shifted from mostly engineering to kind of half and half, and now, like I mentioned, more on the planning and engagement and education side. There's still engineering work that we do with site development work with small developers. We'll still do some transportation work with cities, some green infrastructure work with cities, and then we do a lot of education and workshops to just kind of stand alone, whether it's with a region or with a council or things like that. That has kind of been a third part of our services, I guess. That
so
a paid way to educate.
Yeah, you never know where it's going to take you. Have you found that there are certain kinds of communities that have been more interested and receptive to the message than others? Are you working more with smaller communities, or how's that been?
We do work a lot of work with small communities. We got a couple folks on our team that are really passionate about rural towns, and so that's been part of it. But there's also been some larger communities that have reached out to us, have heard what we do and our approach, and have asked us to come in. I think more than the size, it's probably more about just the stage of growth that they're in. There's the ones that are mostly built out and kind of losing population and maybe shrinking or just trying to reinvent themselves. Uh, those are places that we love to work in. And then on the other end of the spectrum, it's small places that are just on the verge of really rapid growth, and they've got leadership that wants to grow differently. It's the ones in the middle that we have a lot of here in North Texas that uh, they've grown a little bit in the suburban pattern. They've experienced some of the revenue bump and growth from that, and so they're just kind of doubling down on it, and they really love that model. And we've had quite a few of that kind of community that's reached out to us that we've just said no. We can't.
Yeah.
We're going to beat our heads against the wall trying to help you, but you're not going to get it.
Yeah, they're still in that sugar high mode a little bit from the growth that comes that way.
Yeah.
Have there been a couple of communities that stand out for you that you feel like, like the work has been most successful, or where you've been able to advance that discussion a lot more?
Yeah, a lot of folks will associate us with Fate, Texas. They're a small community out here by where I live, and Michael and Justin, those guys, I've known them for years at this point. I still remember the first time went over there to introduce myself to Michael, the city manager. He was brand new, and I live in the area, and so I took him a copy of the Strong Towns book and said, "Hey, man, here's a book. Give it a read. Would love to help you out." And that's kind of how our relationship started with them. So we've done a lot of work with them over the years, just educating council, planning commission, some fiscal analysis and consulting work. Taylor, Texas is another one. They're a small community down in Central Texas. That's one of those small but very fast growing, and their leadership totally understands these concepts, from the mayor to the city manager, the assistant city manager. So we worked on their comprehensive plan last year. That it got, just found out recently, it got an award for I think APA's small and rural town category.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was. But that was one where they really embraced the fiscal message and how can they grow in a way that's going to keep them affordable, both for residents and for the city long term. They've been a lot of fun to work with. I think on the design, on the incremental development side, I don't know if you've had Monty Anderson on your podcast. Mm-hmm. You have? Okay. So Monty's here in Dallas with us, and so we do a lot of his site civil work. We'll help him with some of the entitlement things on some of his projects. But so there's several cities that he's working in, that Duncanville, DeSoto, Midlothian, Dallas, and those have been rewarding too. Just to be able and to help city staff kind of understand how they need to think differently about their processes to allow people like Monty the space they need to do really great stuff that's very needed. So, and then the other thing with Monty that's probably worth mentioning is on several of our comprehensive planning projects, we've brought him in for workshops in the middle of the process to just to help kind of explore some opportunities in downtown, do some of the quick back of the napkin pro formas on some different sites. And that's for the locals to kind of see the numbers pencil out of how that, how those projects can help transform an area or cultivate the local economy. That's been kind of a reinforcing thing, that when you zoom out to the comp plan level or a policy land use level or zoning, seeing some of that proof is what's helped push some people kind of over the top in terms of maybe thinking differently about the policy changes than what they were before. So, and there's several cities that we've done that with. So, um, and now we have been focused mostly in Texas, but we're starting to get calls from other parts of the country to do, if it's just our land use fiscal analysis or um, our comp plans overall. So yeah, it's getting easier to do the work than it was 10 years ago. And we're starting to see more cities and city leaders that are looking for this kind of approach. So the marketing side
Mm-hmm.
of the consulting firm, I guess, is getting easier.
For those who, maybe aren't as familiar, why don't you talk a little bit about the fiscal analysis side of things and what actually that is and what's important about it for
Sure.
communities?
Well, yeah. So if I go back to the issue that I saw and still see in so many places is most cities don't have the money they need to maintain existing infrastructure, let alone building more, that a lot of them are. And so whether it's a standalone project or part of a larger planning effort, we like to go in and help a city understand what their current cost of doing business is. So what are they bringing in terms of revenue, property tax, and sales tax? What does their current budget look like in terms of the cost to serve their overall city, but also different types of development? And then the land use fiscal analysis part of it specifically is, geo accounting is what Joe and the Urban Three guys call it, but it's mapping the revenues and costs for at the parcel level, so that we can see what property tax revenue or sales tax revenue is coming in for that property, what the cost and the infrastructure, the service costs and infrastructure costs are for each parcel. And then you can look at that citywide and start to understand which patterns, whether it's land use or zoning or neighborhoods, are bringing in more revenue than they cost to serve, and which ones cost more to serve than they're bringing in. And then the other level that we'll do is add to that if the city had the money that they really needed to take care of their infrastructure, streets especially, and we'll add that on. And so you can really start to see the patterns that hold their value even when you load more costs in, versus the ones that really go into the red, like a lot of the suburban patterns do when you add in the true cost of infrastructure that, cities just aren't. The simple way to say it is they haven't been saving what they need to replace the streets when they reach the end of their life cycle. And so that massive amount of reconstruction money tends to come due right about the same time that a city's growth phase slows down. And so that's where you see a lot of cities get upside down. And with our planning work, we try to reverse that, try to get out in front of it and say, how can you grow in a way that will align your development with what residents can pay, so keeping it affordable for residents, and then that the city can afford to serve at a reasonable tax rate as well.
Right. So, I think seems to me that one of the challenges with all this kind of work is, in a lot of municipalities, the people that you work with 1 year may not be the same people 2 or 3 years down the road. And sometimes there's this lack of continuity, whether it's a staff thing or an elected official side of things. I don't know if you've encountered that much, and how do you deal
Never,
with
man. Cities are messy, right? No,
to use a phrase.
That is something we run into everywhere. You got elected official cycles, right? You got new folks on council that are coming in every 2 or 4 years. You've got, these days, staff are moving around like crazy. At least in our area. I mean, they're they're bouncing around between cities or between a private consulting firm and back to a city. Um, and I think what we're learning is that you need a broader ongoing conversation in cities that that transcends any one council or any single staff person. That it's just like on the private side when you look at your business plan and your vision or your strategic plan or your core values, you have certain things that lead and guide your organization that different people will plug in and out of over time, but you're still kind of going the same direction. Cities need that too. And I think the most productive and effective cities we've seen have had that overall vision, that overall identity as a community that, as different council members come in and out or different projects happen, the community understands who they are and how different individual projects fit into that bigger journey. I just did a podcast last month with Bill Fulton, who wrote a book called Place and Prosperity. He was in Ventura, California for a while, and just we talked quite a bit about this idea of city leaders needing to understand that people are going to move in and out of the community, businesses are going to move in and out of a community, but there needs to be leadership at the top of an organization, at the top of a city that looks out for the longer term interests of a city and balances those with what's happening day to day. So just an ongoing conversation in cities about the vision and the values and what projects are going to bring money in today, but the liabilities they're going to add in the future. And especially for older places that already have so much in the ground, how are those projects you're doing today going to help you close that resource gap and affordability gaps intentionally over the next 10 years?
So one thing, thinking about that, do you have much luck in your work connecting these principles and the ideas with, when you're doing comp plans, you're engaging a lot of different people. And so it's not just like, city government staff or anything or elected officials, but ideally people across sections of the community. Do you find much luck in the business community in a lot of these towns to identify with these concepts and especially the fiscal analysis at all, or do they jump on that?
Yeah. Most people jump on the fiscal analysis because what we like to say is fiscal sustainability is that common language that everybody can connect with. So you might talk to an average citizen and they might not understand land use or density or road diets or missing middle housing. But when you can put, and I mean, I've been there before in thinking back through different communities where I've lived and comp plan stuff happens and I just like, why does it matter? Why does it matter to me? But when you can put it in terms of the value of somebody's home or and keeping it affordable or providing housing that's more affordable, the property tax rate that they're paying and the services that they're getting for that, or if you can put it in terms of a business or a developer and say, how can you contribute to this community in a way that's going to actually be more affordable or productive for you, whether it's as a tenant or a developer. That it's that common language that kind of brings everybody together. And so we've seen, on the resident side, we've seen residents that started a process that were like, heck no, I don't want density. And then they start to understand that, well, if having a little density in their community could help keep their housing more affordable and keep their tax rate reasonable, they'll shift and they'll say, yeah, I'll support it. And it becomes more about where does it go and what does it look like, then heck no, I don't want it. And on the developer side, we try to, with the plan stuff, we focus on the high end of the values and the fiscal sustainability and affordability. And then in the implementation, we try to work much more incrementally and collaboratively and locally led. And so trying to tap into the local developers, the local property owners, the residents, all the nonprofits and groups in a community, and get them to understand they're a big part of implementation, is part of it. And when you start to ask them, hey, we want input on a plan or a vision, but also challenge them and say, we don't just want your ideas. We actually want you to contribute to executing whatever comes out of this thing. You get some different kind of feedback, but you also get a lot of implementers that will come out and start raising their hand that, hey, we want to contribute. And so the private development community especially really understands this idea of value per acre and building more, a more compact footprint, narrower streets. And so we're kind of opening up that a little bit to where maybe cities zoning and transportation design standards especially have kept them from building what they really want. Now we're giving them a new language to come in and kind of pitch why their stuff brings value and helps the community.
Yeah, it's and I can see all that. I think it's important to kind of hit that cross section. I mean, one of the reasons I ask is, we've been having this conversation in Kansas City now going on several years that was really initiated by, our friend Dennis Strait, who works at a firm used to be called Gould Evans. Now it's called Multi Studio. And he really kicked off a speaker series and everything here several years ago called Making a Great City. And it was really built off of a lot of the Strongtown principles and had, a lot of the usual guests that we all see as part of the roadshow. It's always kind of led to an interesting, question in my mind, which is, how did we kind of end up in this place we are now versus maybe what would have happened 100 years ago, 150 years ago. And, I've had this kind of long running conversation with another architect buddy of mine that it's fascinating how in the history of city planning in a lot of American cities, many of the great city plans that we identify with and think about, like the Burnham plan in Chicago. I would even throw in the Parks and Boulevards plan here in Kansas City and probably many, many similar efforts all over the country. They were really initiated by the business community and really civic-minded people in those places. And then it was later when we developed kind of the administrative apparatus for city planning that we felt like we've kind of like outsourced all of this to city government staff.
Yeah.
And we have almost like this attitude, well, that's your problem now, instead of, locally interested people taking ownership of these and then carrying that forward regardless of who is in city government at the time.
That's a great point. And we just had a conversation internally about that a week or two ago of, there are a lot of really smart and talented people in communities. And we've gotten so siloed with how we do things that, we think our city planning department just needs to lead some of these things, or as a consultant, we feel like, oh, we're the experts, we need to lead this. And really what we need to get back to, and what our goal as a firm is to try to just be facilitators and collaborators. And we can bring in best practices or ideas that have worked in different places, but the people there in that community are always going to be the ones that know it the best and, know what's going to keep them there in terms of just retaining the people and businesses that you have, but also knowing kind of where new development can happen. So just getting at this collaborative implementation idea of how can you just tap into all of that community capital is what we call it. Just time, talent, and treasure. There's people that have time they can contribute. There's people that will write checks for the projects that they believe in. And so how can you identify all of those people and get them connected, working together towards those shared goals? And having city leaders and city staff that understand that and then just how do you navigate the more detailed stuff of who pays for what, and what kind of rules do they have to follow, and but just getting back to being a little more flexible and iterative, and just trying things, and instead of just trying to plan and have everything be so perfect.
Yeah.
We'll say making meaningful progress right now with what you have, and you just look at some of the best projects and best places, and they're built incrementally by the people that are there. Yeah. It's not big plans or big, huge infrastructure projects that get us there.
Yeah. So, me, I like to also cut to like the very tangible, practical side of things. I'm curious about, in a number of the communities where you've had some success with the message and you're working on comp plans and other things that get adopted. What are some of the immediate, more tangible takeaways that you're seeing communities do to help be more resilient or more focused on these principles?
I used to go back and forth with Chuck a little bit about just some of the steps that he, the first step he would always say is just stop building more. And just realistically, most cities are not going to stop doing what they're doing. But when you can show that you can, you continue to grow jobs and get that sales tax bump, but do it through incremental small development instead of the big things that so many economic development folks want to chase. That's definitely been one. You can cultivate that local economy with a bunch of smaller businesses with the people that are there instead of trying to recruit somebody from the outside. So that's been something that a lot of economic development groups have really just leaned into, and they just have not thought about it. I can't even say how many ED folks we've talked to that we present this incremental model, and they're just like, I've never thought about that. That's one. Getting cities to think about how many more people they can add in infill just into their existing service area. Just vacant lots that you're filling in, or just with accessory dwelling units. Again, it just seems so obvious when when we talk about it every day, but when you can start to show a community just how much capacity they have to add people in different types of housing without building another foot of street or water or sewer. Again, it's just one of those things people will just say, I hadn't thought about that. And so it just becomes a matter of, how intense do you get?
Yeah.
Parking, showing the comparisons of a big box site versus a downtown or a suburban fast food place compared to Main Street business. Those start to illuminate parking minimums, and start to open up discussions there. Same thing for stormwater management, regional detention, using open space in a way that manages stormwater, but also serves as amenities. So it's the fiscal message and just helping people understand how much stuff costs to serve and how behind our cities are. It really does open up some of these things that we've talked for years about being needed, of missing middle housing or parking or, better natural resource stewardship and management. So just general things that we see over and over and over with the different communities that come out of the process once you get people to realize that we're building cities that we can't afford to live in and maintain.
Yeah.
So you either have to start charging more in taxes and things get less affordable for more people, right, or you have to start changing what we're doing.
Yeah. And those are never popular choices to, try to illustrate for people, especially when you start talking about, if you don't make these changes, your taxes might have to go up to pay for whatever you're doing.
Mm-hmm. So, well, but at least it gives that language to start to navigate those trade-offs.
Yeah.
Of, if you want lower density and all that, that's great, but you're going to have to pay more.
Yeah. So that kind of leads me to talk about like the political side of things, which I think is always interesting. And I think a lot of times in our world, we don't want to talk about the political aspect, but it's it's real, and it's fascinating how in the world that we work in with certainly part of the Strong Towns message and planning, a lot of the innovation and projects that have been done over the years have been, I think very stereotypically in what we call politically blue places. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and and you are in Texas, and I mean Texas is not a monolith, but it's certainly much more red politically, and uh, and yet many of the things that you're talking about, when I hear you talk about them, we talk about fiscal sustainability, we're talking about keeping tax rates reasonable,
Yep.
a number of things that you would think would resonate with an audience in a politically red part of the world. Has that been your experience, or is that an aspect at all of the work that you've had to undertake?
So yeah, I mean it's a great point, and it kind of goes back to when we were trying to in the early years trying to do better projects and couldn't get people to change. Um, we had to find a way to help explain why we felt these different types of projects were needed, and that fiscal message is what we got to and what we've continued to refine, and it does work with the more conservative folks. Not everybody, um, but it's 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 interesting when you put the real numbers in front of elected officials that like to say we're fiscal conservatives, we're fiscally responsible, and you have the conversation in a community in a way that the residents can see that their city has a resource gap. We have streets that we thought we had the money to pay for, but we don't. Um, and and so we need to make some changes to continue to provide good services at an affordable cost. And then from the elected official side, they then the next time they run, they can't say we're fiscally responsible and then turn around and support things that make that problem worse. So it's it's helping with that. It's also helping a lot in terms of affordable housing. A lot of cities that we work with think that larger lots are the way to to be fiscally sustainable. Um, but when you can show the affordability issues with that, again, just tying everything back through the money, everybody understands that language, and underneath that, the things that are best socially, environmentally, all tend to come out of that too. So we lead with the fiscal message, but some of the the green infrastructure things, the missing middle housing, um, multimodal transportation, road diets, bike ped, all of those things come out of this, and are also more fiscally responsible.
Yeah, it's a weird it's a weird time we live in a lot of ways, because
Oh yes.
there's a lot of these things that we talk about in this world that um, I think have broad appeal across the entire political spectrum. But we live in such an era with extreme culture wars that it's like if one tribe decides that they like something, then the other tribe has to decide that they oppose it, regardless of the qualities of whatever it
Mm-hmm.
has. I also live in a politically red state. Um, we have great cities and towns all over, and I would love for this message to resonate more, but it seems like it's a real challenge when it's perceived as coming, from people, whether they're part of the other side of the aisle or not. But what if the perception is that, or if it's like big city people coming to tell us what to do? It feels like it's a real hurdle to get over, to even get people to try to listen, be open to the message to begin with.
Yeah, and I mean this has helped with a lot of the small towns that we've worked with too. That maybe they're just struggling to keep people or struggling to attract businesses, and you just it's I mean every community is different, but getting people to just kind of just think a little bit bigger than their daily their daily lives and think about what really matters to quality of life and affordability for. I think a really interesting thing, and we're both Gen X, we're both Kevins, and we're both Gen Xers. So, but we're in an interesting place with generations where some of the boomers, they'll kind of share some of the values that more traditionally red values, but they really care about their kids and their grandkids. And so this idea of how are we building places that are going to be affordable and sustainable for their kids and grandkids is a way to connect with them too. So I think the tough thing is trying to connect with a lot of people at a broad level is hard, but when you can reach them individually and you can talk with a grandma about her grandkids, or you can talk with a suburban mom that puts her kid in the back of the Suburban and drives them all over town for the play dates, with the pre-approved friends, or how people are speeding through a neighborhood and explaining how narrowing the street can slow the cars down. When you can get them one-on-one, we have ways to communicate the benefits, of different approaches, and they'll start to understand it. But it's hard with just how busy everybody is, and just how so many people are just consumed with today and what have you done, what have you done for me lately, or what are you doing for me tomorrow? And that's why so much of this falls on the councils, the city managers that are going to be in these communities longer term, to just kind of, you got to help people see that you're building cities for the long haul. You're not just building them for the next 5 years. So it's tough.
So I also want to ask you a Texas question. I think everybody, we're all aware Texas is just booming as a state. People moving there from not just California but all over the country, and has been for a number of years. Obviously, what's happening, especially the last few years that you see that might be different? Is there anything, people from outside of Texas who aren't as familiar with it, things that might surprise people about what you see working in cities and towns all over the state?
Yeah. I've said for years that the Texas miracle is ultimately going to blow up. We just we have a low tax environment. We have, in a lot of places, you've got very high quality of life, especially for families with kids, and housing is still affordable relative to across the country. And we do see a lot of people moving here from both coasts. They're coming here for the affordability. They can sell their home, right, and come here and buy one and buy two others that they can rent out. So an explosion in the rental market is one thing that we're seeing, that and watching how different communities are addressing that has been interesting. The infrastructure thing, though, is really starting to stick as well, because we have more, definitely our large metros, Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, Houston, they've struggled with how to maintain infrastructure for a long time. But now you have a lot of the first ring suburbs and the second ring suburbs that went through their growth phase in the 60s, 70s, 80s, that are now there. They're like, holy crap, how are we going to fix all this stuff? And you can start to use Texas examples to show how people moved from Dallas to the first ring community to the second ring community. And so that the Strong Towns message is really starting to show up here in Texas, whereas 10 or 20 years ago, it wasn't yet. So we always had to use examples from other places to show what's coming. Now we're starting to see it here. And when people start to experience themselves, then, they start to lean in and start to look for solutions a little bit more. The other thing is on the affordability side, the housing costs are skyrocketing. And so I've compared Texas and California a lot and said, Texas today is California 20, 30 years ago. If we don't build more housing of different types, if we don't build more compact places, housing is going to continue to go up. The infrastructure is going to cost more. And so all of those things are starting to show up.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we're seeing kind of at the political level is this battle between local leaders and the state leaders, where the state officials are still trying to push that Texas model, low taxes. We're open for business, give all the incentives to come here. But the local cities are struggling to provide that housing to keep up, and to make their budgets pencil to give everything away for free.
Yeah.
So it's still a great place for folks to come, but we are starting to. It's our turn to start to tackle this whole how do you maintain places that were built 30 years ago by developers.
Do you feel optimistic about that conversation and the ability to face up to sort of the costs relative to the pattern of growth that is so common?
It's a tough one. I get asked this a lot with as many cities as that we work with inside Texas, but also other states. It can be kind of doom and gloom feeling sometimes when we see cities that need 1 billion, 1.3 billion, 800 million just to maintain current streets. But I do see more initiative at the local level of wanting to change zoning and infrastructure standards to build more resilient places. I'm not as optimistic about the state level right now until maybe we see some changes, because they're trying to get it at affordability, but they're just going about it the wrong way. We've got a couple of bills going through that they're talking about allowing ADUs, lowering the minimum lot size. So they're having some good conversations, but I'm not optimistic that they're going to actually get passed.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got at the state GOP, their actual platform. I mean, it has some language in there that is very targeted at anti-automobile initiatives. So using money for any kind of bike ped, public transit, it's just going to be really hard. They want to take the money that's out there and put it all towards roadway expansion and that. So those are. It's interesting to follow it all, but at the local level, I would say I'm optimistic. But at the state level, they're making it really hard for good local leaders to do the right things.
Yeah.
How's that compared to Missouri and Illinois? I mean, just that whole region. You see the same kind of disconnect between local and state?
Yeah. It's similar. And I would say, I think even in like Missouri and Kansas, which I'm probably most familiar with, there's just even, but I think what's most disappointing, just an absence of discussion about these issues at all, and still a bit of a attitude of, well, the approach that we had to economic development 50 years ago is still the right approach today. And regardless of the fact that there are communities all over the state that have been deeply struggling for decades, it seems to be just kind of like rinse and repeat the same model, and not let's stop and reconsider what we're doing and think maybe there's a different approach that might work for some of these places.
Yeah, we did a comp plan for Parsons, Kansas, year and a half or so ago, and going into that community, it was very much that. It was the thought was just we got to recruit businesses here, and they had lost and we're continuing to lose some population slowly, and just changing the narrative in that conversation too, about just getting them to look at the value of their downtown and look at all of the vacant property that they had in their core, was fun to kind of see that shift. But the economic development stuff, kind of go back to what I mentioned earlier of when the economic development folks can see that they can still add jobs and they can still grow the sales tax base through this incremental small developer model. I've seen more of them get more on board with it. So, but you got to have people like Monty, or I know you work with Abby Kinney.
Yeah.
So there's more small develop, and there's a lot of small developers around that are doing good stuff, and they can do amazing stuff when they have the support of the city and the economic development groups, behind them. So it's kind of, I guess I would connect it, at least in property tax states, the interest to raise property tax rates and property taxes in general is not usually there, and the default is always, we're going to go add more sales tax to cover to cover the gap. And then the economic development folks say, well, from a company perspective, a lot of these larger employers are looking for mixed use environments, and our local codes in politics won't let us build that. So it kind of bringing that back to helping city leaders and economic development folks and residents understand that density done well is a win-win for keeping property taxes down, for growing a local economy. That's kind of where we try to steer things.
Yeah.
And are seeing some success, but it takes a lot of education and intentional, nuanced conversations with the different people to help them all understand how it can be done without, and still fit within their concerns,
Yeah. And it just seems like we have such a lack of trust in many ways across communities and everything else. And that's really the frustration. If you're in a place that is a very strong democratically controlled, they don't want to hear from people from the Republican side. Yeah. If you're in a strong Republican area, they don't want to hear people from the Democratic side. And bridging that divide right now seems harder than it's ever been. But I think when you can take it to an extent of what you're talking about, where you can boil it down to specific issues and then just kind of really work at it over, like you said, over, it may not happen right away, but over a period of time, if you keep talking about things that matter to people, to their daily lives, to their pocketbook, then eventually you can have some success with that conversation.
Yeah. It's why I've loved Strong Towns for so long. Is it's not right or left or north or south or anything like that. It's reasonable stuff that most people can understand and get behind. And I just, as much as we can, we try to bring it back to, how are we going to pay for this? How are we going to pay for this and keep it affordable? And start there. And whether it's housing or cost of living for residents, or if it's the cost of building a building or owning or leasing a building from a business perspective, just how are we going to pay for it, and being able to show how big that gap is right now. That's where we start. Yeah. And you can't get everybody, but you can get a bigger group of people in a community to come together around that conversation. And then underneath that, or expanded from that, you get into land use and growth management and infrastructure and parking, economic development incentives, all of those kind of things. But at the broadest level, bring it back to how are we going to afford and pay for things.
Yeah. So Kevin, one tangential thing I just wanted to ask about, I'm always curious about with people like yourself, and I did something similar for a long time. You run a business, you have this, full-fledged consulting business that you are trying to feed with work and keep people, employed and make payroll and all that. But you also, you have opinions that you share with the world on a regular basis. You have a podcast called Go Cultivate. Mm-hmm. You have, this weekly newsletter and other things that you send out. That's sort of like a blog, I guess you would say. Mm-hmm. Most companies don't do that. Most companies kind of like, here's the work we do, and we stay away from the opinion side of thing. What's that like for you guys? And do you think that that's a model that other people could do?
I certainly hope so. We have said from the very beginning. I was working for a large architecture engineering firm, had a great job working nationally, got to see and work, and with a lot of great people and a lot of great communities. But at the end of the day, I saw something broken with how our places were developing and what it's going to mean for this country and ultimately my kids. And that's why we do what we do. Um, but the education part of it is so huge because we can't do more of what we're really passionate about without more people understanding that it's needed. And so, as a small firm, we don't have the resources to go run around and visit 300 cities and and all that. So we've just focused on talking and speaking about our philosophy and sharing resources and sharing stories, and letting the people who that resonates with us find us. And it was slow. It was slow growth in the beginning, but now it's really the last couple of years. We've had more folks coming to us in Texas and outside. I mentioned Parsons, Kansas. We've got a new project we're getting ready to start in Gillette, Wyoming. I'm talking with some folks in Colorado, where we've done some stuff in the past and are going to be doing some new work. So there are more people that want that. The Strong Towns message resonates with them. The incremental development message resonates. The new urbanist approach, but just as a planning engineering firm that wants to help communities put those things into practice. I mean, that's our thing. Fiscal sustainability kind of is the root of everything that we do, and the communities that want that, whether it could be an engineer that believes in this stuff and wants to talk with a PE that's willing to sign a road design that has, or a street design, I should say, that has 10-foot lanes. We're there for you if you want to do a more Strong Towns type of comp plan that looks at maximizing the places that you have. They're finding us too. So, and then the podcast that we do, it really started as kind of a just a fun side project that Jordan Clark at the time wanted to do. He came to me and said, "Hey, I want to start a podcast. We talk about all these things internally. Why don't we talk about it on a podcast and see what happens?" And we did, and it's blown up for us. So we continue to do it. We get good feedback on it. There have been times we've just been too busy to kind of keep. So you'll see we have times where we're consistent with episodes and then not. We have all kinds of ideas of things that we want to write about, and if there's something that I think we just totally suck at, we don't share. We don't share the results of our own work enough. We're just so busy doing the work and doing the education stuff that when it comes back to like, well, do you have any stuff on your website that highlights your projects? Or we just don't have it on there.
It's hard to do.
We do present on it. Yeah, I mean we do present on it at places, but I would love to get to a place where we can write about it and have more kind of internal podcast discussions, just talking about our lessons learned and the work that we're doing with some of our clients.
Yeah, I think
it's worked it's a model that's worked for us. It took time to kind of stick through it, but now it's working really well.
Yeah, I think especially your model where you do a lot of work, with city governments and all, to have retrospectives of, it's been 5 years since we did this thing, 10 years, whatever it is. And you can kind of see, how things have evolved. I know that line of work that you do is not for everybody. It's a challenge, putting yourself out there is always interesting, but there's a bit of a law of attraction sort of thing to it where, just like you said, the people who are more aligned with how you think are probably going to be attracted to you and want to work with you. And those who
Mm-hmm.
probably do other kinds of work that you really don't even want to do anyway aren't going to call.
Yeah, both for marketing and recruiting. For our staff, we that's I would like to be able to expand the engineering work that we do, because I if I had a dollar for every time that I've gotten an email from an engineer that is at a bigger firm saying, I've learned about strong towns, I've started to read about this stuff. I'm having this philosophical problem of knowing that I'm coming to work every day designing things that are not best for our places. That's really cool to have those kind of conversations and have more people, more engineers especially, thinking about that. But yeah, on the marketing side as well. um, I'll say this, like, well, when we interview for comp plans, one of the things I can say and is always going to be kind of a guiding thing for me leading our firm is, we have no interest in designing the big stroads or thoroughfare expansions or anything that's expanding our infrastructure. If and so many of uh, the firms that we go against or competing against with planning work do have that, right? They have the big engineering arm that depends on that, and so we're we're focused on making the communities better and maximizing what they have, and usually that means right sizing and downsizing infrastructure as opposed to expanding it. So that's a real clear kind of differentiator for us, both on engineering and planning work. So
Yeah.
um, that's all the advice I would say. Starting a business or a company is just be very specific about who you are and what you want to do, and just have confidence that there's people out there that want what you're selling, and stick with it long enough to make it to allow it to happen. Because when you're pushing new ideas, it takes a while for people to get comfortable spending their limited money to do something new.
Yeah, no doubt. So have you heard about this thing called Kevinism?
I saw you post something about it the other day, and I didn't have a chance to read the whole thing. So enlighten me.
You need to Google it. I had a coworker tip me off to it as well. But apparently, I think this is more of a German thing, but it's
the best
also
name ever.
Other Europeans where like the name Kevin has become sort of an insult in Germany and other places. So
I'll have to go look.
Yeah, I think we need to take offense at that somehow. But
I do. I think we're. I've never met a Kevin I didn't
exactly.
like.
So, I mean, come on, how could you not like him? But
yeah, well, I know we've gone back and forth a little bit on the whole Gen X thing. I think we're the best generation out there too. So
of course.
But yeah, no, I'll go check it out. I definitely. If Kevins are bad, I certainly want to know why.
It's a terrifying rabbit hole to go down when you get on the internet. So watch out. So Kevin, I do like to end this podcast with just mentioning that this is the Messy City podcast. So I like to ask my guests to think about a place, talk about a place that that might meet that ideal of something that's a little more, something more bottom up and organic. Is there a neighborhood, a city, a town that you think of when I mentioned that kind of messy city phrase that really resonates most with you?
Well, I have to say a couple of places that Monty is working, just because we work so closely with him. And, I have so many conversations with Monty about just the work he's got to do with councils to get them to understand and appreciate the value of the incremental approach. Man, I from the outside, I really applaud kind of what you guys are doing in Kansas City. I think there's some great stuff there. I have not had a chance in a couple of years to really dig back into South Bend, but that nationally, I would probably say South Bend is one that I'm really intrigued by, just with starting with the staff and what they did several years ago to bring Monty and incremental development in, and then Mike King getting involved and how that's evolved. I think South Bend is probably a really good place to study. I one of my guys lives over in Shreveport, Tim Wright, he's been featured on Strong Towns. Him and a couple others started Reform Shreveport a few years ago. Shreveport's another really interesting place. So, but yeah, I'd probably say the communities Monty's working in here in the Dallas area, Duncanville, DeSoto, South Dallas, but South Bend on a national level is doing some pretty transformative things from an incremental development standpoint.
Fantastic. Well, we'll end it there, Kevin. Great to talk to you again, and we'll have to do this again at a future date.
That's good. I started losing my voice here at the end. So no, I appreciate it.
Perfect timing then.
And go. So if you're listening to this, Kevin's wearing a Kansas City Chiefs shirt, and so go Cowboys.
We're having the NFL draft here, so it's a big deal for Kansas City, and it's nice to win Super Bowls. So
we're rambling a little bit, but I don't know, Kevin, if you know, I was born in St. Louis, so I have a lot of friends and family still up in St. Louis, Kansas City, Chicago, that neck of the woods. So I'm still passionate and somewhat loyal to some of the sports.
St. Louis has had
teams up there.
They had a tortured football team history.
Yeah, I remember my dad taking me to Cardinals games, football and baseball at the time. But interesting. It's been interesting just to follow just how that whole area, how it's changed over time. But Kansas City is one of those places, both sides, Kansas and Missouri. I've always loved Kansas City, so it was kind of cool when I heard you were moving back there and kind of plugging back in. So hopefully I'll get up there and visit and see what you guys are up to.
You should do it. Got a place to stay anytime you want to come visit. So,
all right, man.
Okay. Thanks, Kevin. Good to talk to you.
All right. Take care.
Yep.